No one really would have designed a system of portals for people to log into if it wasn't for security issues. If you were coming from a pure customer experience point of view, that isn't what you would do.
Welcome to the Digital Customer Communications Podcast, where we discover how leading regulated companies engage, retain, and delight customers at scale. In this episode, we're joined by Paul Davies, consulting psychologist at Behaviour Consulting, a firm that applies behavioural insights to help organisations align with how humans act. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Oh, absolute pleasure.
Our latest research shows that consumers are overwhelmed by the number of portals and apps and logins that they have access to. This all kind of boils down to knowing how our customers behave and how they want to interact. How can companies better understand their customers so that they can know that they can better understand customer behavior and ensure that their comm strategies are effective and the investments that they make in these channels are well placed?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, with the number of portals? It's hard to know how they didn't predict this at the beginning, that there were going to be portals built on portals and customers were going to be having this sort of choice overload eventually and would lead to inaction a lot of the time, people no longer logging in. But we are where we are now. I mean, one thing's for sure, the portals weren't built with customer experience in mind. They were really built for the security issues, making sure the messages that get sent out are secure and that people can log into a secure space to read documents and what have you. And there always has been, and probably always will be, a conflict between IT teams aiming for high security for their customers and experience teams who want the sort of easiest journey for customers as well. And we know this because even passwords these days, it's almost a joke when people think about the passwords they have for all of the different services we do now. And there is nothing more frustrating in life when you get sent an email saying you have to change your password every 30 days. And that password can't be a password you've used before, must be uppercase, lowercase, number, punctuation, contain part of a soliloquy from Shakespeare in a haiku. It just gets ridiculous and people find it almost laughable now that this sort of level of security is in there. And I think portals are getting to that point as well, that people are starting to almost ignore them because they've cried wolf quite a lot. And let's be honest, no one really would have designed a system of portals for people to log into if it wasn't for security issues. If you were coming from a pure customer experience point of view, that isn't what you would do. And if companies are thinking about alternative channels, a different way of doing it, then the thing they need to concentrate on from a psychological point of view is that engagement with the customer. Any point of adopting a new technology is going to be faced with resistance potentially, but you want adoption. And it's getting that balance between where you hit that. And psychologists have looked at that for quite a long time. Probably the most, concentrated aspect of where psychologists looked at this was back in the 80s, where companies were introducing computer systems into the workplace and really wanted their teams to adopt them. Previously in the 70s, there were typewriters and potentially word processors, but the computing revolution was happening in the sort of early 80s. And psychologists looked at this sort of scenario of going, what does it take for people to adopt and accept technology, new technology, or how would they resist it, and how can you overcome that? And one psychologist in particular, a chap called Paul Davies, came up with something called the technology acceptance model. And it's quite a deep model, but on the surface, it's rather simple. And it just suggests that there's only two things that a company will need to look at if they're wanting customers, clients, or even their own teams to adopt something new. And that is the perception of usefulness and the perception of ease of use. Those are the two main mechanisms where people then will form the intention to use something new. And usefulness is obvious. Is it going to benefit me if I then start doing this instead of what I do already? And then the ease of use is the learning curve of me having to take this new bit of technology into my life going to be worth it? And actually, do I feel it's useful and ease of use? But the important part, I think, which Paul Davies put was that it's the perception of both, not necessarily the reality of those. So it's not the reality of how useful it is or the reality of how easy it is to use. It's the perception at the beginning of whether people think if they did it, would it be? And they are different. And I think companies should be working on the perception and understanding that perception is just as important, if not more important, to get people to do something and change people's behaviour than the reality of things. But because such systems like portals and other different technological solutions are normally run by engineers, IT developers who have a certain mindset that they go, well, if we build it, they will come. They forget that the perception aspect is going to be really important. But it's not just the computer side of it as well. I mean, there are so many areas of our lives and our daily lives where things have changed over time and we've maybe resisted change, but then accepted it. I mean, in finance or in money, I suppose, we moved from cheques to cards. I remember being a student and paying for half a Guinness with a cheque. 85p writing checks out. It was hugely frustrating, and the ease was not there, and it definitely didn't get me any friends behind the bar. But we moved to cards then, and people sort of resisted that because they didn't think it was as secure, but they still signed for things when the cards first came out. Then it went from signing to swiping and then to chip and pin, and then it went to contactless, and now we're at the point of virtual wallets. Each point of that got resistance from people. But importantly, each of those was easier than the last. And I think that's really important because people don't like change, but they like effort less. And I think if you make something easy to use and that perception that it's going to be easier for them to do something, that will get adoption far more than you telling them that it's going to be instrumentally useful for them actually. And Fred Davies' model does promote the idea that ease of use is the center of everything. That is what's going to get people to do it. Think about another example. The classic example, everyone has to mention an Apple example. Back in 2001, I think it was, Apple launched the iPod. So way before the iPhones even existed, so iPod. And they knew that they couldn't compete with the sort of audio quality that people might be used to in their home hi-fi systems. And I remember being sort of a teenager into my 20s. I loved the Richer Sounds catalogue where I'd pore over all of the hi-fi separates, and I'd even look at the wires. You could buy cables between systems which were made of gold, and they would cost hundreds of pounds just for the cables, so you could get that perfect audio quality. And people loved that. Actually, Apple came out and just said, this is something where you could have 1,000 songs in your pocket. And they focused on that ease of use rather than the actual quality aspect. And even the most ardent audiophile, after a while, just gave in and said, actually, having that ability to have every album I own available at any point is so easy, I'm going to adopt it. And actually, where they stopped using the hi-fi so much. And I think that's important for companies and everyone to know that when something is so easy, you start to compromise on things you previously believed were important to you. And that's sort of crucial. We always think that people have these beliefs and opinions, but sometimes when it's so easy to do, people will start to adopt it. Just one more example, because I find this fascinating. You go to the supermarket, self-checkout tills, I think, came in around 2012. They started to be introduced in the UK and received real backlash from people. People saying, oh, you're removing the human contact from our experience. It's just the company trying to get us to do all the packing for ourselves. It's lazy. And now we look at it, and actually it is easier, isn't it, to go through, especially if you've got a basket of shopping. It's just a lot easier and quicker to go through that bit than it is to go through another section as well. And so much so that people like Amazon have now started to open till-free stores where you can just walk in and walk out without actually going through a till at all. It just automatically registers on your phone that you're in there and what you've bought. Now, what they're doing is making it so easy for people to do that it becomes something that they'll do from now on. So I would say overall, if you want customers to behave in a certain way, make it easier to perform than any other action they can do. And the problem with portals, when you see it in that way, is that actually you're increasing the effort on the consumer by making them come to you for a message. And we should just think about that as not good customer experience. I mean, it reminds me of when you receive one of those little red slips through the door that you've missed the mail person and you've got to go down the depot and pick a parcel up. That's infuriating that I have to then take time out of my life to drive down to the depot, find out what this parcel was. And even more infuriating, if that parcel actually isn't something I was particularly wanting, or it's for my partner, or even worse, it's for the next door neighbour and they thought they'd drop it into my door instead. And I think that's where I mentioned at the beginning that portals often now cry wolf by not every message that they send or put in there is important or time sensitive. They put things like, we're updating our terms and conditions. And yet I've had to go in to just hear them tell me that they're updating their terms and conditions. And the more that they do that, and the more they give these sort of false messages, pulling me into somewhere for something I didn't want in the first place, actually I start to ignore it. And people start to learn over time that they're not going to be important messages. And so I think there has to be a different way of doing it. And it has to be centered on that ease of use.
Yeah. It's interesting that you, throughout all those examples, the portals, the self-checkout, the postman not leaving the package, the friction actually that appears in those processes is because of security. With the self-checkout, the thing that annoys people is that every so often, every 10 purchases, I'm going to have to get everything out of my trolley and they're going to have to check that I've scanned the right things. The postman's not leaving the package because they don't want it to be stolen, or they don't want the liability for it being stolen. But I mean, that's what we focus on as a company. It's an endless struggle, because the more friction you introduce for security, the more friction you introduce generally. Balancing that is so important.
It is that. I'm not saying security isn't an issue. Of course not. We want things to be secure. But really, when I get a message to ask me to log in because something's changed and I go in and it's just a terms and conditions update, is that really security, or is that just laziness?
Yeah, and there are definitely better ways to communicate things like that. What we focus on really is using, just like in what companies are doing in financial services really well, is using regulation and compliance to drive innovation. We're looking at how we can use security by, making two-factor authentication more contextual and relevant to people to drive the experience, rather than seeing them as these two ends of a spectrum. They can work in tandem. There were a couple of things that you mentioned there. Perception was one of them. And I think so. Perception of ease of use is more important in terms of influencing behavior than the actual ease of use. How can we change our customers' perception? There are a lot of companies that want to educate their consumers. Can we educate our consumers? How do we educate our consumers? And is there a way that we can maybe not look to educate them, but bunny hop on previous innovations or things that they already do to more effectively instigate behavioural change?
Yeah. First of all, I would probably just pick up on the point of perception of ease of use is important, and it's often forgotten about. But reality of ease of use is equally as important. If you lie to customers and say it's easy, and then they go into it and it's not, then you've lost customers a bit further down the line.
Promises. Yeah,
you do have to keep your promises. So you do need to work on perception of ease of use and then reality of ease of use. And actually, if for whatever reason, and in financial services, there are lots of reasons why something may not be that easy, that you have to be honest about it to start with. And again, there are ways to sort of do that to make it sound like it's worthwhile, and you can lean more into that usefulness aspect than into the ease of use. But it's making sure that you are sort of creating this journey that is a holistic journey. But then going on to your point about education, this is where you probably have to stop me, because I could talk about this for a long time. It's the biggest challenge I have to challenge the companies I work with about. And it's like, if you are trying to change behavior, if you're trying to get a customer to do something or do something differently, providing information is one of the worst ways to do it. In fact, psychologists say it already, not just in finance, but in healthcare and everywhere. The number one worst way to try and change someone's behavior is to provide education to them. Instead, what you should look at is, well, first of all, what you should look at is acknowledge what action it is that you're actually aiming for. And it sounds obvious, but again, I work with a lot of companies where, part of the project is to look through the brief and then pull out what behaviors we're trying to aim for in order to get some success metrics at the other end. And it's amazing how many individuals, teams, organizations don't actually pull out the behaviors, the actions. They focus instead on things like the word we'd like our customers to understand, or we'd like them to engage more, or we'd like them to value something that we do. None of those are behaviours. They're all cognitions, and they're very hard to measure understanding, engagement, or value. A behaviour is something you can measure and define. And I think spending time at the beginning of a project just going, okay, what are our behaviours? And I think that's more important than actually identifying your target audience. Companies spend a lot of effort identifying audiences and segmenting them into demographic or even psychographics. I don't particularly adhere and align myself to that. Somebody who's 24 and somebody who's 64 often have the very same behavioural motivations to do something despite their ages and their very different circumstances. And I think it's important to know that whilst people, and I mean teams, are very keen to understand behavioural psychology and behavioural economics in particular, probably, you'll actually struggle to systematically apply any behavioural insight if you first fail to identify a behaviour. So that's always the first thing to do, is write them down. What behaviour or sequence of behaviours, which often is the case, are we trying to enact here? And actually that's more difficult than you first think, because let's take an example outside of finance. It might be you say, oh, we've got a project here that's trying to help people to lose weight. That's what we're trying to do. Now, losing weight isn't a behaviour. You can't do losing weight. That is an outcome. So you go, okay, how do we help people to lose weight? And it might be teams say, well, really, there's two sort of ways. We can either get people to exercise more, or we get people to eat less. Both of those will result in losing weight. And that's a behaviour, isn't it? Exercising more, eating less. But they're in what we call in psychology broad behaviours. They're not very defined. Exercise more hasn't defined it to what it is. How will they exercise more, or how will they eat less? You need to keep asking how. And if you were going down the line of exercising more, you might say, how will they do that? How are we going to encourage that? And we might end up with, we'd like people to cycle to work twice a week. And that is a defined behaviour. And we call those bright line behaviours, because it's very defined, and you know when somebody has done it and you know when somebody hasn't done it. Now, in health, it really helps to define bright line behaviours. It might be, if you're not doing exercise more, it might be on the eat less side, stop drinking fizzy drinks. It might just be an aspect of their behaviour which they can improve upon, which will help them lose weight, the outcome. But it's a bright line behaviour, because if they stop drinking fizzy drinks, you know if they've done it or not. And I think that's really good, to try and pull the bright line behaviours out of any project. But you've also got to do more than that. And this comes back to the education bit again. And I have mentioned that I go on and on about this, but it's important because it is an instinct that we have that education works. But we need to update our mindset to the reality of how behaviour is actually triggered in people. And as I said, information in the form of education is one of the least effective ways to actively do that. And an example I've written about in my book recently is that in the UK, the total cost of alcohol on society in the form of, cost to the health service, alcohol-related crime or what have you, is estimated to be over £29 billion. And in response to that, the UK government, Public Health England, and other organisations, that they repeatedly launch campaigns promoting the positive aspects of responsible drinking and also highlighting that negative impact of drinking too much. But research has shown that whilst these mass media campaigns are often recalled by individuals because they often use shock tactics. I think the smoking ones probably come to mind more, where you hear the shock tactics of, oh, that's disgusting. And often they do achieve changes in knowledge. And actually they do achieve changes in people's attitudes and beliefs towards alcohol or tobacco, for instance. But the crucial thing is there is little to no evidence of any reduction in alcohol consumption because of these. And that's amazing. People's knowledge increases, but their behaviour doesn't change. And I think we've always got to ask of any project, any company's launching, are we happy if people increase their knowledge but don't do anything? I've done a lot of research with customers on investing. It's a problem why people may not invest, and they're losing money by keeping money in other products, savings products, premium bonds, or what have you, and they could and may be suitable for an investment product. And I do research and customers say, well, I don't invest because it's complicated, isn't it? I don't understand it. It's full of jargon. It's not for me. And so teams hear that and go, what we need to do then is educate people, isn't it? That's a total mistake, because for one, it's assuming that the people in the research know the reasons why they don't do something. Now, as psychologists, we know that actually we don't have that level of introspection to really understand why we do or do not do something. But we're very polite as well. And in research, when we're getting paid to give answers, we will give answers. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be true. So actually, we have to do things that align more with what people do as a behaviour than what they think they do as a behaviour. And I think giving education, in terms of that, we don't want to educate people about investing. We want people to move towards investing bit by bit. And the difference between those two things is what we call an information-first approach to behaviour change, which is giving them information and assuming that information is going to increase their knowledge. And by that increased knowledge, they're then going to go, brilliant, I will now do something differently, to the actual difference of behaviour-first intervention, which is actually get them to start something small that maybe isn't the final thing that you want them to do, isn't full investing. It is just maybe join the investment portal or the investment platform and have a look around, read an article. And then from that, it's the next thing. And then moving slowly towards something, which is the behaviour, which is be better off, which is actually investing for them in that sense. And I think, sorry, Sam, go on, yes.
I was just going to jump in on the channels, because when you think about education versus trying to influence customer behaviour by looking more at behavioural triggers, my mind jumps to, as a business trying to influence behaviour, a blog post and email campaign that goes out to my customers on investing versus building customer journeys into my portal, or sending them a button in an email that gets them into, registering on the portal, or our new WhatsApp channel so that they can receive bite-sized information more easily. Is it just about the information, or is it channel dependent as well? Are there any behavioural frameworks that can help us understand how to choose the right channel to use?
Yes and no, unhelpfully. I think it's not so much that any particular channel is more effective, even for certain behaviours, but using the right channel or the right media at the right point in your customer's decision journey. That's what's important. And on top of this, and you mentioned the information there, on top of this, the right message within the right media at the right point in their decision journey. And I think where I see many teams making behavioural mistakes is presenting a message at the wrong time. So if you present a message to somebody, maybe a message promoting a transaction, getting them to start doing something at the point that the customer is at a point of pre-contemplation, it's hitting things at the wrong point. And there are generally 5 points in a customer's decision-making process. In fact, not just a customer, in humans' decision-making process, there's a model called the trans-theoretical model of behaviour change, which shows that there are 5 distinct areas that people move through when making a decision. And the first of these is pre-contemplation. And that is, somebody is not sat there thinking about doing the action that you wish to promote and that you're wishing to get them to do. They're not actively researching or considering it at all. They are unaware. And it may be, that they are unaware that this exists in the first place, that maybe a solution that your company offers is even existing. That's an easy sort of target customer, because if they're unaware, you just have to make them aware as a trigger point. And there are certain channels that align very well to that. Email coming through, highlighting a new product or an update to a service for your existing customers. There are billboards which do this, highlighting that something new is coming out, a new shampoo or something like that. And actually, there's a phrase by a Stanford psychologist, a wonderful psychologist called B.J. Fogg, and the phrase he uses to encapsulate all of this sort of psychological thinking is, what you need to do is place hot triggers into the paths of motivated people. Place hot triggers into the paths of motivated people. And that's one sentence actually contains quite a lot of thinking from deeper models such as COM-B, which we would use as psychologists, but are quite complicated and deep. But it talks about hot triggers. Well, first of all, triggers that you need to choose the media that can land in front of somebody. That's the path, in their path. So they go there anyway. It's somewhere where people go naturally, and you're injecting something into that pathway. And a trigger that lets them aware that you can offer a solution. A hot trigger is one they can act on right away. Like you said, Sam, there's a button at the bottom of the email which allows you to click on it. And if I'm now aware that you offer a service that can solve a problem in my life, and there's a button for me to go forward and do something about that, that's a hot trigger. If it comes in the middle of my Instagram reels and it grabs my attention, then actually it's in my pathway and it offers a hot trigger for me to move towards it. And then there's the motivation aspect. You hop into the paths of motivated people, that it has to align with what I feel is important to me. And it comes back to that usefulness side of it. Is it going to solve a problem in my life? When all of that aligns next to each other, actually you've got a really good media channel. And I think just by thinking about things in that way, you can start to see which channels are going to be more relevant to your customer and actually be more effective for your message.
Hot triggers in front of motivated customers, people. It is a great way to understand how to communicate with your customers in the right way, at the right time, in the right place. But as always, these simple frameworks are so commonly badly executed. So it's easy. It would be easy for someone to jump from that to, right, okay, so we put buttons everywhere. Our only goal is to make the journey as frictionless as possible. We simplify the customer journey. The less clicks, the better. And there's that, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's the quite a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, there was a chart comparing the revenue growth or for new customer acquisition for challenger banks versus incumbents next to the number of clicks that it takes to create a new account. And as you would imagine, the ones that acquired the most new customers, had the least clicks. We know that's not always true, though. And if you put too many buttons in front of people, they get overwhelmed, just like they would with 119 portals. Is it always the case to simplify, that simplifying is better, that more buttons, more triggers is better? How do you balance that against overloading people?
Well, as an overall rule, simplifying the journey is good. And I think the reason that the challenger banks came out really fighting was that they looked at the application journeys of a lot of high street banks and retail banks and went, actually, it doesn't need to be like that, does it? It just happened to be that simplifying it meant that they could create a far better user journey than somebody. I remember when I started my business, I looked at a particular retail bank and they said, yeah, we can open a business account for you. Please bring your passport, all your business documents. You have to have a meeting with our manager. And then you have to obviously find time to come in and do that. And then once that's approved, you get your so-and-sos. I then switched to have a look at an online challenger bank, and I managed to open an account within 10 minutes on my phone. No meeting necessary. Everything was done there. I could scan things. That simplification is really beneficial. Of course it is. But I think simplification shouldn't be measured just in time and clicks. That isn't the right measure. And sometimes we're asking the wrong question at the beginning if all we're trying to do is make it quicker or less clicks from one point to another. And the question shouldn't be, how do we get people through it quickly? It should be, how do we make the journey engaging enough that they don't mind how long it takes? And sometimes in finance especially, we cannot make it shorter. It has to have a certain amount of detail in there. But we fall prey a lot of the time of making it really dull. And that perception of ease of use again, people think it's going to be really dull, and actually they're proved right a lot of the time. A great project I worked on, which I think exemplifies this, I'm just going to promote a project that I worked on, but it was with Santander in the UK. I worked on them about 4 years ago, launching their digital investment advisor. It's their robo-advisor, as everyone was coming out with robo-advisors at the time. But Santander said, look, we want to try and do something a little bit more useful. Our customers don't want jargon-filled digital tools. They want something that they can relate to and actually spend time contemplating it. And that was the big difference, that they changed their mindset. They said, this isn't a tool for our customers to transact. It's a tool where our customers can contemplate the opportunity to invest. And that's a huge difference, because if you're starting a project with a transaction in mind, you make it very functionary and you make that simple journey as quick as you possibly can. But when it comes to investing, people do need to actually take their time. They do need to slow down a little bit and understand whether it is going to be something suitable for them or not. And the bank has to do their due diligence and do the same thing. And one of the things we wanted to build, in fact, we had to build in, was an attitude to risk questionnaire. Now, I'm sure over time you've done an attitude to risk questionnaire at some point. They are normally dull as dishwater. They are a series of questions, normally 10 to 15 questions. They're asked in a very dry manner. They're asked normally in a Likert scale, that sort of strongly agree to strongly disagree to different statements about how would you feel if your money went down by a certain percentage over the time and what have you. And you sort of go through and answer these questions. And they suffer from two things. One is that perception of ease of use just disappears as soon as somebody sees that type of question come up. But also, people want to get to the end, so they just start answering. So they're not answering very accurately anymore. They're just wanting to get through it. So actually their validity, I think, is very weak. But we wanted to do something different. And we looked at trying to build in an attitude to risk questionnaire, but also a couple of others, which is one looked at their customers' feeling about loss and their loss aversion, basically. And then another one was on their present bias, as in, are they more focused on today than tomorrow? That classic thing is that you'd rather have less money today than more money tomorrow. And it's getting that balance. And with all of those three things, the attitude to risk, loss aversion, and present bias, it meant Santander could get enough information to actually give them some very good advice on what's investment product they should choose. But the problem is we're just adding to this journey. We've just got 3 extra things in here, and this is going to take customers time. And we had a lot of people in Santander saying, we've got to keep it short. We've got to keep it short. And I had to keep reminding them, saying, no, remember, this is a contemplation journey, not a transaction journey. And therefore, we are doing our customers a good service by doing this, but we can't make it dull. We have to make it engaging. And we did lots of trials, failed on a lot of trials because they were dull. We started off with the normal questionnaires. And then we got to a point where we designed these activities where the attitude to risk questionnaire, for instance, is almost like you're receiving text messages and you have to reply to them. So actually, it's a very different type of process you go through. And we did customer research. We did about 40 more different sessions of research, and we got it. We knew we had it when there was one customer, I'll always remember her. She was sat down with the person who was interviewing her, and I was in the one-way mirror room, the other side observing. And she was quiet. She was doing this attitude to risk activity. And if you're involved in any user research, you know that when a customer goes quiet, it's not great because you're not understanding what they're doing. So the interviewer who was in the room sort of leant forward and just interrupted and said, oh, could you tell me what you're thinking? And as soon as he started speaking, she went, shh, I'm enjoying this. She was doing an attitude to risk questionnaire, and yet she said she was enjoying it. And we knew at that point that we got something right, because that journey overall takes about 25 minutes. But when that 25 minutes is worthwhile and people enjoy it and actually are engaged with it, then it doesn't matter if it's 25 minutes. You don't want to make it shorter. That's a better customer journey. And I think a lot of user experience people have been rightly taught and read in books that simplification is sometimes a shorter journey. But they forget that sometimes word is important, because it isn't always a shorter journey.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast with someone from Stripe yesterday. He said, we had so many competitors doing exactly the same thing. I can't explain it, but one of the biggest variables in Stripe's success was people love beautiful things. And I thought that was so poignant, because, there may be lots of other companies building the same customer journey, the same simplification of a customer journey that already exists. But sometimes more than putting big logos on a web page or badges or other sort of trust signals, making sure the buttons, the colors match each other, making sure the font is readable and the UX is beautiful, has more of an effect on how much you trust this company that you're handing your details over to than anything else. And that's quite a difficult thing to measure, because you can't compare it. You're essentially looking at creativity, aren't you? In Asana, which I use every day as a project management app, they do things where if you complete a task or you do something, a unicorn flies across the screen. Those kind of delight factors that you have to really get right for them to actually work and not be annoying, are very difficult to measure across companies, because it's the fact that they all do them differently, the fact that it's creative, that means that you enjoy it, you enjoy the process, you enjoy the experience.
And it's called the aesthetic usability effect. Of course, in psychology, we have to give it a name.
Yeah.
And obviously in user experience side as well, the aesthetic usability effect is really important. It's the reason why Apple is the most lucrative company in the world, because they understand that persuasive ability when something just looks like it's an easy, useful, enjoyable experience. And they've built a whole company on that.
Before you go, I know you have to. Have I still got 3 minutes with you?
Totally, yeah.
Can we wrap up by doing a brief walkthrough of a high-level process that a company might go through from realizing that one of their communications, workflows, journeys, maybe an automated message on a portal isn't effectively driving the action that they'd like it to? How do they go from recognizing they've got a problem to realizing that they need to do something and choosing a solution?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think knowing you've got a problem is kind of easy these days. You get your metrics through, you kind of know where you would like your customers to be moving to or actions that they should be doing, and they're not. Problems aren't normally a difficult thing to work out. The difficulty is knowing, okay, where do we put something in place which overcomes that problem? And the first thing to do would be to map the process and the media channels used to those 5 stages of decision making. And I mentioned one of them before, pre-contemplation. But I've created a model called the Behavior Relay, and it actually then uses this trans-theoretical model of behavior change, but focuses it on people who are looking at communications and going, okay, where can you actually start to look at doing something differently and injecting behavioural insight into it. And just briefly, after pre-contemplation, when, as I mentioned, people are not actively thinking about what you want them to do and need to be made aware of it, if you can get them through that phase, they move through to contemplation. So actually the important definition between pre-contemplation and contemplation is that in pre-contemplation, people are not ready to transact. They're just ready to hear a little bit more from you. And that's all you need to do. At the end of the pre-contemplation phase, people should just ask, okay, tell me a bit more. And then the contemplation phase is where you tell them a little bit more. And in that contemplation phase, you're helping people to do 4 things. And you're only helping people to do 4 things. And people often overdo things at this point. But you want to tell them why it's useful for them, why it's easy for them to do, that other people are doing it as well. And then why are you somebody telling them to do this? Why are you trustworthy? In order to get their sort of sense. Once people have ticked off in their head those 4 things, actually people do build the intention to go ahead and do something, and try it out at least. But intention doesn't always lead to action, because in the between or after contemplation, the next phase is preparation, where people start to move towards the action, but actually they're not doing it yet. And the classic point of preparation in when there has to be a time between them forming the intention of doing something and actually doing it. And this is where people can fall off. So to give a real world example, I had a company come to me and they said, look, we've got an online form where people can request a financial advice appointment with one of our advisors, and then they can set up a Zoom call. And that's really successful. And I looked at it and it was really successful because, one, they send out their emails to their customers who have not had emails for a long time, not had a communication and advice for a long time, saying that actually this is available to you as one of our customers. So their pre-contemplation messages on an email hit their customers really well, moved them to their website. Their website was really simple. It told them that it was easy. It told them that it was free for them as well, which is always a bonus. And the form was easy to fill out. So it got a lot of people to form the intention to say, yes, I'd like a financial advice appointment. This looks great. The problem was the number of people who cancelled or just didn't actually show up to their appointment was high. So something happened between them forming the intention to go to the advice appointment and actually attending the advice appointment. And then we pinpointed it down to this preparation phase. And in the preparation phase, what happened was the time between them filling this form in and actually going, uncertainty set in. They started to ask themselves questions such as, what am I going to be asked? Will I be asked things that I don't know the answer to? Will I actually feel ashamed about some of the financial decisions that I've made along the way? And I'm sitting opposite somebody who's an expert in finance, and I'm going to have to sort of admit to them that I've done this or I've done that. And actually all of this doubt comes into mind. And what they start to do is go, I do want financial advice, but I'm not ready for it yet. I need to prepare myself more. And so they cancel, or worse, they just don't show up. Now, what we did was say, that's your problem. It's in the preparation phase. It's not the action phase, which is following that, because the action phase is your meetings are rather good. The feedback they have from their financial advisors were excellent. Their problem was in the preparation phase, and we pinpointed it to that. And we said, what channels are available for you to try and lower the uncertainty in your customer's mind, again, we're talking perception here, so that they still have the confidence to go through with their intention. And what we did, we put some channels out on both on email and letter. It was a while ago, so it was letters as well, where it told them very simply what to expect at their meeting, what type of questions they're going to be asked, and what to bring along. And every bit of wording in there was aimed at just lowering that uncertainty and that anxiety of what to expect. And then actually it worked. The number of people then attending their appointments significantly increased. And that's a really great thing. So I think it's to model your channels around how customers make decisions, not just on your own channels and the information you want to give. And the best thing to do is when those two things line up, you're getting all of your comms in the right media at the right point in that customer's decision-making journey. And that's why my model is called the Behaviour Relay, because it's like a relay race. A successful relay race is when you hand the baton between stages successfully and help people and support people all the way through a smooth journey. And that's the way to do it. So yeah, I've written about that in my book called Behave, which is out next year. And if anyone wants to have a look at that, it's behavebook.com, where I will be putting up information about the Behaviour Relay and how communications, media, marketing teams can benefit from knowing the alignment between people's decisions and your own communication strategy.
That's amazing. I think we'll end there. Is there anywhere else that you'd like to point people to? Where can they find you personally?
Oh, well, yeah, well, I've got the book plug in. That was the main thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, personally, you can get me on Behavioural. I post little short reels every day now, just on little aspects of psychology. And when I find an interesting study, which I think is going to be super relevant for people, I just talk about that and put it on Instagram. So you can find me at Behavioural. I post all my lectures and videos and appearances on YouTube at BehaviourTube. And you can get me at LinkedIn as well if you just search for Paul Davies.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure everybody will find it incredibly interesting. Thank you, Paul Davies.
Thank you very much, Sam.